Thank you. Wow, this is a lot of people. It's good to be here. Please call me Derek. I'm pleased to be here to be back at Bowling Green in a virtual format to be able to talk about my experiences and experiences of being a student and a professional of color. Um, and what I'll say is please feel free to ask questions. If you have questions, you can unmute yourself to ask a question. You can type it in the chat, or you can direct message me and you can ask or participate that way. So there are a variety of ways to participate. And I want to say that I think that Bowling Green State University really gave me the preparation that I needed for my career. I mean, I was mentored by so many people at Bowling Green. I got teaching opportunities, I got research opportunities, clinical opportunities. It was just a really, really wonderful program and a great program to be in as a PhD student. So I thank all of you for giving me that experience. And it's great to see some familiar faces, but I'm also glad to meet some new individuals as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And everyone can see that, I assume. Okay, great. So when I started thinking about this presentation, I thought, what can I talk about? And what I did was I just started to just reflect upon my own experiences going through not just CSD, but just going through my undergraduate education as a student of color, and then also in my professional life as a student of color. And I thought, what are some themes that I think are probably present throughout this experience? And so the title sort of reflects those themes that I think came out of that experience. So there were definitely disadvantages throughout my experiences, which I'll share some of those. There were some resilience factors, meaning that I had to find some ways to overcome those disadvantages. And then also inclusion, which is what I'm going to end with, talking about some ideas for inclusion. So disadvantage, resilience, and inclusion really just reflects the themes that's come out of my experience. And then perspectives and reflections on being an underrepresented student and professional. I thought, why don't I have my experience, and my experience is my experience, but why don't I just ask some of my colleagues who are also professionals of color who have been students of color in this field to just give me some talking points. So what I did was I emailed 4 colleagues of mine who are professionals of color, and I said, I'm going to give this presentation. And what are some talking points that you think would be important for a presentation like this? What do you think when you reflect upon your experiences? And I said, just give me about 3 or 4 sentences and I'll work from there. They each gave me like a page of things to talk about, which I think was interesting because even though I only asked for 3 or 4 sentences, a paragraph, I think because of their experiences, they had a lot to say. So I have their ideas infused into this presentation. And even though we are talking about the focus is on students and professionals of color, particularly with race and sexual orientation, I think the ideas can apply more broadly because I think everybody experiences disadvantage in some way or another. And I think that by talking about how we can make spaces more inclusive for students of color and for professionals of color, it actually makes it better for everyone because it makes us more mindful about how a space can be disadvantaged. And it also makes us more mindful of how we can make that space to be more inclusive. So I think that the ideas here can really just be extended on a more broader level, even though specifically we're talking about race and about sexual orientation to some extent. Let me make sure. Okay. So I do have a positionality statement here. And one is that I am a BIPOC faculty member, and I do have additional marginalized identities. I am still a work in progress, which I think is important to mention because just because I'm a person of color with additional marginalized identities, I still need to learn. I still make mistakes, and there are still areas where I think I need to grow. So I'm still a work in progress, and I'm still learning. And I don't claim to be the expert, sort of giving you responses or giving you the answers. I feel like my role here is really to just open the space a little bit wider for us to think about some things that we may not have thought about before. And together, how can we brainstorm some ideas about how to make our spaces more inclusive? So again, I don't have all of the answers, and I still have a lot to learn. So that's my positionality statement there. I'm just checking to make sure there's nothing in the chat there. Okay. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, we see these terms a lot. We've been seeing them a lot, especially over the past couple of years. So I just thought that I would really just sort of start this presentation just by orienting everyone to sort of how I think about diversity, how I think about equity, and how I think about inclusion. So when I think about diversity, diversity really refers to variety or differences. And diversity can be used to, with respect to many characteristics and many identities. So I think typically when we hear diversity, we immediately think of race, we immediately think of ethnicity, but diversity just simply means difference. So what different types of students or what different types of faculty do I have with respect to race, with respect to gender, with respect to sexual orientation, ability, nationality, et cetera? We can think about many different identities and many different characteristics along lines of difference. So diversity just means difference. But just because we have difference, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have inclusion. So inclusion refers to how welcoming an environment feels. So we have people, we want difference, we want diversity with respect to a variety of identities, but then we also have to make sure that we make the space as welcoming as we can for the individuals whom we bring into our space. And so that's what we mean by inclusion. So what experiences do students or faculty have within this environment? Who feels welcome and who feels left out? And then equity, the way that I define it, is looking at providing individuals with the resources that they need to be successful. Some individuals may need more resources than others. So everyone is not necessarily on the same playing field. So people come to the college environment and people come to the classroom with different backgrounds and different experiences. And some students and some individuals just may need more resources than others. So who may be starting out at a disadvantage, and how can I provide them with resources to make the playing field more level? Does that mean more explanation? Does that mean more mentoring? Does that mean more support? I mean, that could be a variety of ways. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, these are how I think about these terms. So when we look at diversity within Asha, this is based on a 2019 member and affiliate profile, where you see here we have over 200,000 CSD professionals within Asha. And then you can see the breakdown here according to audiologists, speech language pathologists, and speech language and hearing scientists. So even though we have so many members within Asha, if you look at how many people identify with these different identities, we see small numbers here. So with respect to gender, 3.7% are male, 8.3% of Asha members and affiliates identify as a racial minority, and 30.7% of Asha members and affiliates are individuals 34 years of age or younger. So, and we can see this even in our universities and our graduate programs. I mean, if I know for our program and for a lot of programs, we see disparities between individuals in our undergraduate programs and individuals in our graduate programs. You know, students, male students and students of color are certainly represented more in our undergraduate programs than in our graduate programs. And a lot of graduate programs are thinking about ways to make those programs more inclusive, but there are barriers to students just even getting into graduate programs. So even though I'm not really focused a lot on that today, that's also a barrier to think about, is how to be more inclusive in the admissions process. Okay, so our first exercise, and you're free to unmute your microphone or you're free to type your responses in the chat. So the first question I have is, think about a time or times where you felt left out. Or think about a time or times where you may have concealed or adjusted a part of yourself. And how did those experiences make you feel? So if you're comfortable sharing, either verbally or in the chat, how would you respond to that?
Well, I can talk. I'm also a student of color, so like I feel like I have some understanding because I felt like, you know, I've been like the only Black student in the class before, and like I feel like I have to change how I talk and how I like present myself so people don't think like a certain way about me, like a specific stereotype.
Yes.
So, and it you know, like the code switching that I have to do, it's kind of it's a little annoying, but it's like, you know, that's society, so like that's just how I have to live in this world. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experience. And it's interesting that what the experience you just shared was common across all of my colleagues who I asked to give me talking points. I had that later in the presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. So I see isolation. Someone wrote here, working hard to pretend to be someone that I'm not.
So if I may, in regardless, clearly I'm a white female in a predominantly female situation now, but right throughout our lives, we might find yourself in you're different than everyone else, and it can very much make you feel inferior. Am I good enough to be here? Am I good enough to participate?
Right.
I don't know that I am, type of situation.
Thank you. Absolutely. I see a message here. It makes me feel like I'm taking up too much space. Yeah. And, you know, I certainly don't mean to imply that the experiences that maybe students of color feel, or the experiences that students who are gay feel or LGBTQ feel, that it's the same across the board. But I think just looking inward and just thinking about how you might feel left out in general, I think you can really begin to empathize with how other students with other identities might feel. Others. Yeah, I really appreciate your openness, everyone who's sharing, and I appreciate your vulnerability. And think about a time where, or times where you felt included, and think about times where you felt free to express yourself, and how did those experiences make you feel? So again, you can say it out loud, you can message everyone, or you can private message me. What does inclusion feel like? Confident, yes, I see confident.
Since no one else is talking, I'll chime in again, but it's honestly, it's something you don't think about, or something I don't think about. You don't notice it necessarily.
Yes. Liberated, welcoming. It made me feel I didn't have to change anything about myself in order to be accepted. Freeing. People think I'm smarter than I am because I speak. Yes, okay, yes, accepted. Makes you feel I can breathe freely. Yes, that you belong. Absolutely. Thank you for these messages. Safe and loved. Very supportive. Absolutely. Yes. And I do appreciate the fact that some of you may be messaging everyone and some of you are private messaging me. So I'm not saying those names, but I do want to create this space where everyone feels included in us. So not everyone may feel included speaking before the whole group. So the private message feature is a way that everyone can feel included that way. So sometimes if I say something that's not in the chat, it's because I'm reading a private message. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for these responses. So already we are identifying some themes that I'm going to be talking about. So when I think about my own personal reflection, I went to a private school. It was a private institution, probably about maybe, I want to say, oh goodness, 2,000 students on campus at most. It was a predominantly white institution. And I started out wanting to be a medical doctor, and I was a chemistry major initially. And okay, great. Some more comments are still coming in. I actually, the week before classes started, there was a program that was called the New Science Project. So what they did was they brought in a lot of students who were underrepresented. So it could be students of color, females, students who were socioeconomically disadvantaged. And we spent a week on campus before everyone else came. And we had opportunities to connect to each other. We took there were lectures, there were opportunities to participate in science experiments. It was really for students of color, underrepresented students in the sciences to be able to connect before everyone else came. So that was a really nice experience because we were able to sort of form a bond and connect with each other. But as a student in the sciences, I took organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry. I took all of these hard science classes and I never made anything above a C. And I also will mention that I was probably either the only Black student in the class or maybe there were maybe 3 students at most. And I never made anything, I mean, my grades on my exams were always really horrible. We had these labs that were like 3 hours long. And I can't remember now if we chose our partners or if we were assigned partners, but I always felt like I was a burden to my partner because I never understood what was going on. I always felt lost. I always felt behind. And I didn't know how to ask for help. And I really thought it was just something that was my problem, that it was me. But on campus, there was really an issue with students of color in the sciences in general. And the university was really initiating efforts to retain students of color in the sciences because students of color, it was at a disproportionate rate that they were not doing as well in the sciences and they were not being retained in the sciences. But I can say that with my experience, I really didn't know how to ask for help. It was hard to find study groups and study partners because I felt like people were so much smarter than me and what could I have to offer? And so I oftentimes found myself either studying on my own or just not even coming to class towards the end because like, why come to class? I'm not going to understand anyway. So I had to end up dropping that major and I stuck with sociology and I ended up being a sociology major, which actually turned out to be really nice because a lot of my research is very sociological. But my undergraduate experience in the sciences, I think reflects a larger problem with students of color in the sciences and in STEM professions in terms of their experiences and the attrition rate. When I got to graduate school, it was a much different experience because I'm from Houston and I went to University of Houston, which is a program that's very diverse. I mean, Houston's probably the most diverse city in the country with respect to race and ethnicity. So I had a very, very diverse program and I had professors who really encouraged me. So I went to one of my professors and told her I wanted to do this research on Black men who stutter. and she encouraged me. I mean, she was more excited than I was, but I was really provided with support and with resources. And in my program, it was very diverse. So there were a lot of people around me who understood me. And I had a much more positive experience in my graduate program because I felt like I had a lot of mentoring and a lot of support. And I don't want to imply that I did not have mentoring in my undergraduate program. So I had some really good people who mentored me there too. But in my professional work experience, I accepted a position in a school district that was predominantly a white school district. In the school that I worked for, I think I was the only male, no, I was one of 2 male faculty members. And I think the only other African-American faculty person on staff was a paraprofessional. So it did feel a little bit uncomfortable in some ways. And actually, I remember the paraprofessional and I had a private conversation once, and she told me that there were a couple of students and families who she felt like I really needed to be careful because she thought that there was an issue there with race. So I did feel somewhat uncomfortable having to, present my results or present my findings to families, being able, when I worked with certain students or certain clients, to some extent, there was some discomfort there. But one of the things I learned a lot later is that there are students of color who also felt that they perceived discrimination and stigma from some of the clients that they work with as well. So this just sort of opens up the conversation a little bit. And I'm going to talk about some of these things a little bit later. But I think what I experienced personally in my undergraduate experience and then my professional work experience is reflective of some of the things that a lot of professionals of color also experience. So some common themes here that I think helped me were having mentors, people who could provide me with information and provide me with resources, and having connections to individuals who I knew could understand where I was coming from. So I want to touch a little bit on cultural competence and cultural humility, these are phrases that we hear a lot in Asha, through Asha. So cultural competence, the idea that we seek to learn about the cultures of others, but we also reflect upon our own culture, which is cultural humility. So we can't possibly know or be experts on every single culture. We can only strive to understand, and we can only strive to learn more. But it also means that we have to be aware of what our personal biases might be and how those personal biases might impact our interactions with other people we work with other students we work with, other professionals we work with, and clients that we work with. And it's always an ongoing process. It's always an evolving process. It never stops. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the gender minority stress model. And this is a model that was originally developed to focus on the the lesbian, gay, bisexual experience. And then it was adapted to talk about gender minorities. But I think in general, this model can be applied in a variety of ways. It can be applied. There are minority stress models for race. There are minority stress models for learning disabilities. I think in general, they all pretty much say the same thing, that there are stress factors that people experience, distal stress factors and proximal stress factors. There are resilience factors, and both of these affect a person's outcomes. So if we look at distal stress factors, people can experience discrimination. So these are practices that disadvantage people. They're practices they are behaviors that disadvantage people. People can experience rejection. So rejection can be being omitted. It can be being erased, being left out. People can experience victimization. So they can experience physical abuse. They can experience verbal abuse. And people can experience not being affirmed for who they are. So if we look, I mean, even though this is specifically related to gender in this particular model, if we look at race and sexual orientation, the idea of distal stress factors, discrimination, rejection, victimization, and non-affirmation are all sort of distal factors that people of color and LGBTQ plus people can experience. And these distal stress factors then in turn affect an individual. So these are proximal stress factors. So internalizing stigma, this simply means that something is wrong with me, that I'm the problem. Internalized stigma, negative expectation. So I know that I won't do well. I know that it's not going to go well for me. I know that I'm going to get an F on this test. I know that, you always sort of expect negative outcomes. And then concealment, someone mentioned this earlier, the extent to which you feel like you have to withhold a part of who you are so that you can fit into a normative environment. So these distal and these proximal stress factors then can have an effect on a person's mental and their physical health. However, there are resilience factors that can counteract these distal and proximal stress factors. So the research across a lot of these models show that being connected to a community, being connected to individuals who understand you and are able to support you can mitigate these distal and proximal stress factors. The extent to which people feel pride or acceptance for who they are. So you're raised with a sense of pride. You're raised knowing that you can do it. You are raised with a sense that your sense of self is strong. So these can mitigate these stress factors here. And again, we can look at this across a lot of different identities. And then we have intersectionality here, which I wanted to mention here, where this is the idea that people can experience overlapping discriminations. So intersectionality and cultural diversity are slightly different. Cultural diversity is the idea that people can have different characteristics and different identities. So you might be a female, you might be a male, you might be gender non-binary, you might be African American, you might be gay, you might be a religious person. So the fact that we have different identities is what diversity is. But how we may be disadvantaged by those identities is where intersectionality comes into play. So intersectionality takes it a step further to say how people might be disadvantaged by some of their identities. So we see here the wheel of power and privilege. So on the outside here, we have different characteristics. And the more we get closer to the inner circle, these are identities that we are associated with power and privilege. And the more we move to the outer circle, these are identities that are marginalized. So ability, for example, is a characteristic. And so able-bodied people may experience a lot less marginalization than people with some disability versus people with a significant disability. Here with wealth, people who are rich versus people who are middle class versus people who are poor. And so intersectionality came out of the literature on Black feminism by Kimberly Crenshaw, where she said that in order to really understand the experiences of Black women, you can't just look at race alone or gender alone, that both work together to create the type of experience that a Black woman would have. And so over the years, intersectionality has been used to talk about a variety of ways that people can be disadvantaged by overlapping identities. Okay, so when we look at higher education, this study right here was actually done by one of my classmates who I was an undergrad with, where she interviewed students in their first and second year of college. And then she interviewed those same students in their third and their fourth year of college. And what she found out of her research was that students of color and first generation students tended to doubt themselves more and tended to feel like they were falling behind more than white students. And that students with marginalized identities come to the college classroom with predetermined assumptions about their abilities. And so she asked all of these students what their perceptions were of diversity, and did they feel like those perceptions affect their experiences in college. And what she found was that it was really easy for students to recognize where they lacked privilege. So this is a really nice article to read. It's a qualitative study that really just sort of highlights experiences that students in higher education in general might have as students of color. So higher education considerations are retention in STEM disciplines, microaggressions. Many students talked about microaggressions that they experience either from other students or from classmates. Racially motivated or LGBTQ plus hate crimes, so do I feel safe on this campus? And also many times students might feel like they don't have close connections to a community that they identify with. And again, we know that a connection to a community can really foster a sense of safety and a sense of inclusion. And this was actually a master's thesis, which I enjoy highlighting student research, where this was a qualitative study that looked at undergraduate students of color in the field of speech language pathology. And so the findings indicated that financial stability, support, and identity were themes that came out of this experience. So financial stability, being able to afford your education, being able to find scholarships to fund you. So students are more likely to come to college and be retained if they have financial stability. The support they receive from their classmates and from their professors, and also their sense of identity and feeling like they are affirmed for who they are, which are all things that keep coming up in the literature on the experiences of students of color in higher education. And then a colleague and we did a project where we looked at case studies of male students in speech pathology. And what we found were that the male students that we talked to talked a lot about how study group dynamics were affected. They sort of felt like sometimes it was difficult to find study groups because it was harder to sort of integrate themselves into study groups or social groups, being a male. Client-clinician interaction, sometimes students felt like they weren't necessarily as crafty or creative coming up with ideas for therapy or having to interact with female clients or a younger female client. Sometimes that was a little bit tricky. And then finding a need to connect with other males in the field. So these are just some themes that sort of came out of this case study that we did on looking at males in the field. Okay, so then what I did was I asked a few of my colleagues, as I mentioned earlier, to just give me some talking points and some perspectives on their experiences. And so these are some things I'm going to talk about now. It's sort of organized according to the themes that sort of came out of their talking points, plus my own experiences. And a lot of these themes are themes that some of you already mentioned earlier, and these are all themes that keep coming up in the literature. The first theme that is just prevalent among my colleagues and in the literature are feelings of isolation. So you're the only one, or you are one of few students or faculty in your department with respect to race, with respect to sexual orientation, with respect to gender identity. And this could be with respect to a number of things. But feeling a sense of isolation. Having fewer opportunities for connection. So some people may have ready-made opportunities for connection. If you are a female, for example, you have a lot of females to connect to. If you are not a person of color, then you have a lot of people to connect to. And it's not that I think for sometimes students of color, they sort of feel a need to be able, it's not that everyone wants connection, and certainly we interact with people who are different than who we are. But sometimes students of color might feel like they really desire a connection with other students who are like them. The same thing is true for students who are LGBTQ+. Sometimes there's just a need to connect to someone who is like you with regards to that identity, because you can relate on levels that other people can't relate to. And so many times when people feel isolated, they have to seek connections outside of their department. So isolation was probably the first thing that people wrote in their message to me, and what I see in the literature. Another theme here is difficulty finding mentors and opportunities. So having to go outside of your department to find mentors. Not knowing about scholarship or mentoring opportunities for students of color. You know, there are within the university and within Asha and within other related organizations, there are scholarship opportunities and mentoring opportunities specifically for students of color, but students may not necessarily be aware of those when they're in their programs. And so this was, and they don't really learn about them until later when they are no longer are eligible. Not knowing about resources. Handling implicit biases. So being perceived as meeting a quota. You know, I remember, let me see. Yeah. I remember someone thinking that I was at my undergraduate school because I was on a scholarship. No, I think the person asked me, was I on a basketball scholarship? And I said, I was not. I said, I don't play basketball, I don't play sports. So sometimes students of color, and I've had other colleagues who mentioned the same thing, that sometimes people perceive that they're there because they're on a scholarship or a minority scholarship. Being the representative for your culture. So you sometimes people are perceived that they have to be the spokesperson for their identity. Biases towards professional style or dress, so hair. So if you're a Black female, for example, braids, or having locks, or wearing head dresses, those types of things, clothing. That aptitude is perceived as less than. So the idea or the assumption that if you are a student of color, that the assumption that you are going to perform less than than white students. These are all things that students of color perceived in their programs and from some of their instructors. Handling microaggressions. So being asked by others if you're in the right place. So do you know what class this is? Or at a conference, do you know what this is supposed to be about? So I did have a colleague who was in the right place, but she was approached by a white female, and she was asked, are you sure you're in the right place? And she had to say 2 or 3 times, yes, I'm in the right place. Which, yeah, so I'll go on. Being the cultural informant, meaning that you have to be the one to educate other people when everyone really should be educating themselves. Assuming that only faculty of color can teach courses on multiculturalism. Not perceiving support from other faculty. So this sort of relates to where we had a lot of, so after the racial events and the Black Lives Matter movements of last summer, there were a lot of virtual seminars on diversity, equity, inclusion. There were a lot of virtual seminars on where people of color were talking about their experiences in the profession. I know CAPSIT hosted some. I think the Teaching and Learning in Communication Sciences and Disorders Journal hosted some. The National Black Association hosted some. There were a lot of virtual events, but some faculty perceived like they were the only ones who were really interested in those things. And there was some disappointment by not seeing other faculty members express an interest or attend some of these seminars and some of these events. So there was just a perceived lack of support from other faculty. And also being aware that sometimes students can experience microaggressions from clients and from families that they work with. So these are all our themes of microaggressions that some of my colleagues reported, but are also common experiences with students of color in general, or faculty of color. Cultural adjustment. So I think someone mentioned this earlier, and actually quite a few people mentioned this. Making constant cultural adjustments to fit in. So this is what one of my colleagues here said. He said, from a student standpoint, as a Black male in a predominantly white field, I recall having to assimilate a great deal to norms and customs that were not my own. I felt I lacked the social and cultural capital other students possess, and I didn't know how to overcome that. However, despite other students being more advantaged than I, this helped me persevere. That's the bright side, I guess. The other side that is more illuminated is how our institutions have a lot of work to do in becoming socially just and equitable. And then someone else put here, constant code switching can be exhausting. And actually, this is interesting that earlier we had someone who just said that same point here about constant code switching. So constantly having to just adjust yourself to fit in. Okay, so these are all things that individuals that I corresponded with, these are all the talking points they mentioned about what it's like to be either a student or a professional of color. And all of these things are reflected in the research. So knowing all of these things that people can possibly experience, what can we do to make our spaces more inclusive? So inclusion and infusion. And infusion is a term that was used by Dr. Ida Stockman out of Michigan State University, who said that it's not just about inclusion, it's also about infusion. Okay. So where are you in this picture? So we all know about Where's Waldo, and we all are interested in finding Waldo. And I start with this because I wanted to talk about here, ABCs of inclusive leadership. Beverly Daniel Tatum, I think, is just the best person. She wrote a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in a Cafeteria? I recommend this book for anybody wanting to learn about inclusion. I think it's a really, really great read. And our university, we actually, Dr. Tatum actually came to campus, and we had like a Q&A with her. It was a university-wide event, but prior to her coming, the university made these books freely available to anyone who wanted to be a part of a book club. So they said, we're going to have this book club, sign up if you're interested. And then the university bought free books just for anyone who wanted to be in the book club. And they divided the interested participants into a few groups. And so there was a facilitator for each of the groups. And so we read selected chapters. We came together and discussed those chapters on 2 different occasions so that when Dr. Tatum came to campus, we were able to have a more informed discussion. But one of the things that she talks about are the ABCs of inclusive leadership. So the A refers to affirming identity. Who is included and who is missing? And her example, which I use a lot, is imagine if you are at an event, and then after the event, there's a photographer who is there, and the photographer is taking pictures of everyone at this event. And then the photographer sends the pictures around digitally to everyone. As you scroll through the pictures, her question is, what's the first thing that you're going to do? And she said, the only correct answer to this question is that you're going to look for yourself in the picture. When you scroll through each of those pictures, you're going to look for yourself. If you know that you were sitting next to the person in the blue jacket, then you're going to look for the person in the blue jacket. You're going to look for yourself. And if you keep scrolling through the pictures and you never see yourself in the pictures, then it might be a little bit disheartening. So affirming identity is who is included, who is missing. So whenever we come to a space, we want to know, are there people in this space who look like me? But it's not just that, though. It's, are there people in this space who share my interests? Are there people in this space who share my values? Are there people in this space who are interested in the things that I'm interested in? So affirming identity. So inclusive leadership is the A, recognizing who is included, who is missing. The B stands for building community. So these are efforts to create ties among everyone. But the B depends on the A. So imagine again, if the same photographer said, okay, after this event is over, I want to take a few pictures of the event. If you know that you were never in the pictures, when the pictures are emailed out, you might say to yourself, why hang around, right? I'm never in the picture anyway, so why should I hang around? So when people feel affirmed and when people feel included, then they will want to participate in team building activities because they know that their voice matters and they know that they are affirmed. So if we know who is included and who is missing, and we make an effort to affirm individuals, then they will want to participate in team building efforts because they know that their voice matters. And then the C is about cultivating leadership. So it's training the next generation of professionals to lead. So it's basically observing this process of, who is included. And now that we know that who's included and we can affirm everyone, creating opportunities for team building. And cultivating leadership is just simply doing that process and observing that process and carrying out that process. So the ABCs of inclusion. This is a really, really great book that I really, really recommend. Okay, so in terms of inclusion, raising awareness and visibility. So department mission statements can be very important about raising awareness and showing that you as a department care about the needs of your students and your faculty. And this department has already done that. You've already have a nice mission statement, you have a nice statement on racism, and it's really nice to be able to show that you care about these issues. Course syllabi statement. So I put a statement this semester in my course syllabi. It was, I called it a diversity and inclusion statement where, I let my students know that I care about diversity and inclusion, and that I made attempts to include assignments on diversity and inclusion, that I made attempts this semester to include more articles that address diverse populations, and that I wanted to make my classroom as safe as possible. So students are always welcome to come to me or email me if they wish to be called by a certain pronoun. They're free to let me know. They can put that in the Zoom space, or they are free to let me know that privately. And I also mentioned in my statement that I'm a work in progress and that I can make a mistake and that I'm not perfect. And so they're welcome to come to me if they feel in any way that maybe I said something that was offensive, that it wasn't meant to be, or maybe if something that about the course they feel can be changed to be more inclusive. So I made my own statement and I sort of expressed my vulnerability there because I really wanted students to feel that the classroom was a safe space for them, my classroom. Department committees on diversity, equity, and inclusion that don't just have to be the people of color. Of course, anyone should be on those committees. Anti-discrimination magnets and stickers. You don't really know how much that means for a student who is LGBTQ+ to see an ally sticker on your office door. or on your department's website, or somewhere visible. It really makes a big difference in that student knowing that this is a safe person, this is a safe space. Posting flyers and events throughout the department that advertise a broad range of campus and community activities. We don't want to assume that students are going to automatically seek these things out. Sometimes it's important for students to know that there are other groups and events on campus and in the community that they can participate with. And if the department advertises that, it sort of shows that the department cares about the well-being of all of its students. So these are things like Pride Week, which is this week, or Coming Out Week, or Black History Month. There are other student organization groups on campus that students can become a part of. Faculty constituency groups. So here at Wayne State, we have a Black Faculty and Staff Association. We have a queer Faculty and Staff Association. We also have an out list where it's just a webpage where any employee can just post their picture and their department if they are out. So students can go to that, faculty can go to that just to see who is out on campus, who is a person that I could talk to, who is a safe person, who can I connect with. So again, these things don't just relate to students, they relate to faculty inclusion as well. Advertising scholarships and mentoring programs. There may be opportunities within your university. There certainly are opportunities within Asha and also within CAPCIT. Asha has a minority student leadership program that students can be a part of. So just making students aware of what's available to them and what resources they have. Checking, okay. Infusion of diversity into courses. So Asha has multicultural constituency groups, which I think a lot of us know. And I actually talk about these groups with my students at the intro level. So, and so these are the Asha multicultural constituency groups, which anyone can join. I mean, just 2 days ago, I just joined the Asian Pacific Islander Speech, Language, and Hearing Caucus. Get to know you assignments. So on the first day of class, I have students introduce themselves to me and to each other, and I have them tell a fun fact about themselves. And actually, I find that a lot of students they connect with each other that first day because there are musicians in the class, and there are students in the class who, I'm interested in ASL. Well, so am I. So students are able to really find connections among each other by just doing some really fun get to know you assignments. I make students aware of Asha multicultural constituency groups in my undergraduate course. So I teach a course on Introduction to Speech Language Pathology. It's the first course that students take. And I actually have an assignment where they have to go to the Asha website and I have them answer a few questions. But also, one of my questions is I want you to review the multicultural constituency groups. And then I want you to choose 2 of those groups and I want you to answer these questions about it. So, because I don't think that students may not necessarily know that these groups exist, but these groups all have Facebook pages, they have Twitter accounts, they have Instagram accounts, and students can follow these pages. And this is a nice way for students to get connected to other students in the field who are like them. And it's an opportunity for students to connect to mentors. It's an opportunity for them to learn about scholarships, about resources, about conferences. So this is really a nice way to infuse diversity at the undergraduate level into courses by making students aware of these opportunities. And joining a multicultural constituency group, they're for everybody. That should be diversify course reading content, or I guess it could be diversity course reading content. Encouraging involvement in research projects and presentations. So, when students are involved in research and they can be involved in presentations, that really does a lot for interest in the field and also retention. Don't downplay research projects and papers that address diverse populations. And creating opportunities for students to meet each other. I think, again, sometimes study groups can be hard to find, study partners can be hard to find. Sometimes in my class, I have projects where I assign the groups, and sometimes students like that because it's an opportunity for them to meet other students in the class that they wouldn't have otherwise have met. Increasing presence. So actively seeking out workshops and seminars. So, actively seek out a workshop or actively seek out a seminar where you can learn for yourself about issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, and about populations that you want to learn more about. Proactive student groups. So I know that our student groups, we have an audiology and a local NISHLA chapter where the students are taking active steps. They even created their own statements against racism and on diversity and inclusion, and they even have instituted efforts to be more inclusive. So even this can be even at the level of the student group, your local NISHLA groups. Having flexible office hours and advising appointments where students can just drop in. Again, I think that can be really helpful. Sometimes students don't actively seek out professors in their office hours. And I remember sometimes I would be standing outside the door. Should I go in? Should I not go in? That was something I had to learn to do. But having flexible advising appointments and having multiple times where students can just drop in and say hi. Checking in with other faculty colleagues. Faculty can experience isolation. Faculty can experience all of these things that students are experiencing. So just checking in with other faculty. How are you doing? How are things going? I think that can be a good way to just sort of address isolation that even faculty might experience. Okay, so second exercise. What are some areas in your own practice, either as a student, as a faculty member, instructor, or supervisor that you think need addressing? And actually, I'm going to ask these two together. So the first is, what are some areas in your own practice that you think need addressing? And think about some ways where you can foster diversity, equity, and inclusion, either as a student, as a faculty member, instructor, or as a clinical supervisor. So just thinking about yourself, if you're a student or an instructor, and your work setting, what are some areas that you think might need addressing, and what are some ways that you think that you can be more proactive in fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion? So now we're sort of moving into the discussion period here. So comments, observations, what are some ways that you think you can be more proactive? Or what are some things that you didn't think about before, but now you're thinking about that you think you might want to address? Okay. Okay, educate teachers and school SOPs about code switching and explain differences versus disabilities. Yeah, that's a good one. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we talk about diverse populations within professional settings, but not much about diversity amongst ourselves and peers. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, okay. Better about understanding and communicating to students that people from different backgrounds will experience disorders differently. Absolutely, yeah. Joining groups to become more educated on topics regarding diversity and inclusion. Absolutely. There's a gap in identifying folks who need additional supports. A needs survey in the beginning of my courses. Actually, that's something I forgot to mention there, that in my get to know you assignment, one of the things that I think I probably would want to add is tell me how you learn, or tell me about your learning style. Engaging with caucuses, yep. Multicultural constituency groups and classes. Diversifying course content, yes. Authors from diverse backgrounds. Oh, awesome, yes. Yes, so thank you for that comment, yeah. Yeah, there's a space for everyone. There's a space for everyone, absolutely, thank you. Yes, so the person who private messaged me, by all means, please do join that group. Yes, you should join that group. And there's a Facebook page too for that group. Interacting with families of different backgrounds and clinical settings, yes. Yes, male SLPs, These are all great. Yeah, again, I really appreciate your openness, your vulnerability, your ideas. Yeah. Working with more diverse clinical populations, yes, absolutely. Yes, okay. And, you know, I think that you know, this really should be, we really want this to become more naturalized. So, and that's a really good point here. So, you know, it's not that, okay, we have what's normal, and now we have the special or diverse populations. I mean, all of this really should become more normalized. So by infusing these ideas into our courses, we really want to make that a standard practice because it really benefits everybody. I mean, diversity just doesn't benefit students of color. Diversity benefits everybody. So I think the starting point is what we're doing now, but we really want to make these practices more normalized. We really want it just to we really want it to be standard practice that we talk about multiculturalism. We really want it to be a standard practice that we are talking about inclusion. We really want to make these things more standard. So I think the more we do it, the more standard, hopefully, it will become. Yeah. Other ideas. I don't think that. Okay, I was looking to see, I don't think my undergraduate advisor wanted to come. I don't think she's here today. I don't see her in the room, but I did want to end with this. So Dr. Keisho Scott was my undergraduate advisor, and she and I are friends to this day, and she really did a lot for me in terms of my professional development. So she was working on some research that she interviewed me for. And at the end of the interview, I had one of her books that I wanted her to sign to me. And so when she signed the book, this is what she wrote in the book. So she said, "To Derek, you have been my teacher today, instructing me in the importance of deep honesty and possibilities, reminding me that habits of survival have hallways not traveled. And this is the important part. You survived, so you can liberate those voices humanity needs recorded. Please write us all out of our boxes. Be there for the young ones ahead. Replace me in the classroom." So I use that in a lot of my presentation because I really value her mentorship to me. So that is the end of my presentation. So I wanted to just open it up for questions, comments, thoughts, reflections, observations, whatever. What are you thinking? And this could just be like ideas and thoughts in general at this point. How can we identify the students, professionals, and clients who may need additional supports, particularly with special focus in working against stereotypes? I think someone mentioned a needs survey. There could possibly be a needs survey where people can feel, maybe like an anonymous survey, possibly, where it could be something maybe that the department does, where people can feel, free to just sort of write or express sort of what they need. So I think a needs survey can be one. Again, one of the things that I want to do in my classes is, when I do my get to know you exercise, maybe ask a couple of questions to students about, their learning style and how they learn best. So I think a needs survey, or I think just making yourself available and letting students know that they can come to you, whether you are an instructor or a supervisor, about things that concern them in the program. So I think it could be private office hours. It can be a needs survey that someone mentioned. Yes. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
This is not a question, it's just a comment, Dr. Daniels. Thank you for spending this time with us here today. And I just wanted to say that I also teach the intro section, and I think the suggestions you have are very insightful, and I will definitely be implementing many, if not all of them, the next time I teach this course. So thank you very much for those suggestions. I really think they'll help to improve the quality of my teaching and the course overall.
Thank you. And even in some of those virtual spaces, like, I'm a member of quite a few of the virtual Facebook groups, and a lot of those groups have students there where they're asking questions to each other. They're asking questions about mentorship and about, so those are really nice opportunities for students to connect to other students. Yeah, great. That's a good book. And also what I wanted to say is that I think that we always have to just do the work. It's sort of like, when you clean a house, you have to constantly attend to it. There are things that are going to be put in place. There are things that are going to be out of place, and then you put them back into place. So because the house is lived in, there are things are going to constantly being put in place and out of place, but you just have to pay attention to it. You have to attend to it, and you just have to constantly keep it up. So you constantly have to always reevaluate yourself and reevaluate your spaces to see how can we continue to make them more inclusive. I don't think there's ever a point necessarily that you reach where things are going to be perfect. You just have to constantly reevaluate. Okay, so there was a question. Sometimes working towards equity can sometimes feel disheartening or too overwhelming. Have you ever experienced those feelings, and how do you handle those feelings? Well, I would say that it's really everyone's issue. Addressing diversity and equity really falls on all of us to do that. You know, it doesn't just fall on one person. It just doesn't just fall on the people with the marginalized identities. Everyone really should be doing the work. So I think, if I'm understanding the question, sometimes it might feel overwhelming if you feel like you're the one that's doing all of the work and maybe you're not seeing much change. But I think the more everyone recognizes how this is really everyone's issue, then I think that's really what I would say to that. It's really everyone's issue, not just one person's issue or a few people's issues. You're welcome. Thank you.
So I do have a question, Dr. Daniels, and perhaps you can, as somebody who's thought about this and who has studied these kinds of issues, do you have any insights and perspectives on why some fields have been better at diversifying the body of professionals when compared to speech language pathology? Like, for example, I know when we are talking about the gender balance, and I understand that it's a complex issue and there are different reasons for why the demographics pan out in the way that they do. I mean, I don't think there are as many barriers to men getting involved in speech language pathology as there are people of color. But why do you think fields like physical therapy have got better male representation, and fields like, just general teaching, I think people of color are better represented? And when you compare those to speech language pathology, do you have any insights on what those other fields are doing that we aren't? Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't know if you've thought about this, but I just thought I would ask and see if you have any perspective on that.
You know, I don't know if I know. I think a lot of it may just have to do with visibility. I mean, I know in some of when we did the case study with the males that we did, a lot of them, it was just about the visibility, and just not even knowing that this profession, like I didn't even know this profession existed until I was probably a senior in college when I found out about speech language pathology. So it just might not be visible. I mean, that's probably the first thing that comes to my mind is how visible it is. So I know in BASLA, it's the National Black Association for Speech, Language, and Hearing. They go into a lot of the high schools and even the middle schools to talk about communication disorders, what that is, what that means, and what you can do. I mean, what does it mean to be an audiologist or a speech language pathologist? So that might be one way is looking at, and I know at here we have career day, and we have there's a day where we have, what's it called? I think it's I forget the title of it, but it's a day where students from middle schools and high schools can learn about different professions. And so we always make sure that we're there and have a space there so students can learn about who we are, because probably over half the students who come through don't even know who we are or what we do as a profession. So visibility just might be one reason. I don't know if anyone else has any other insights into that.
Derek, I did have one other question to follow up on Dr. Archer's question. I'm wondering, I think you in studying fluency and stuttering disorders, that subfield has done a really good job of, looking at identity and not necessarily treating the disorder and overly stigmatizing it. And there's more of an idea of an acceptance and learning how to stutter maybe more easily. To what extent do you think maybe the kind of disability framework that speech pathology has in general plays into this discussion? Or do you think it has a role in maybe excluding certain groups of people?
Let me think about that. So you say the models that we apply in stuttering in particular, does that have a place in speech pathology?
Yeah, kind of like the idea of being more accepting of, speech fluency differences, not always working to correct or fix the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that we often we like to think that we're a helping profession, but sometimes I feel like clients may view us as a fixing profession. And I think fluency work has done really well at kind of separating that out and helping people find a balance. I'm just wondering what your views are on that, being someone who's an expert in that and done really great work on identity and folks who stutter.
Yeah, in fluency, we are sort of moving more towards a neurodiversity sort of framework, a neurodiversity idea. So neurodiversity is basically the concept that people don't have broken brains or damaged brains or abnormal brains. It's just biological variation. And when you look at stuttering, typically when we define stuttering, it's more from a medical model perspective or from an impairment-based perspective. But some emerging perspectives is that it's just a difference in speech diversity. It's a difference in the way that how someone talks. And that people who stutter, it's, traditionally, the thought was that you have to help the person to be as fluent as possible, stutter as little as possible for them to be successful. And now we're embracing the fact that, stuttering is just a way of speaking. We have stuttering. I have a shirt that says, actually, when I was at Bowling Green, a lot of us doc students there stuttered, and we created t-shirts that said legalize stuttering. Mm-hmm. So it's just this idea that stuttering is a part of sort of disability culture, and it's sort of something to be celebrated. And, it's optional. People have options. I mean, yes, there are some people who choose to want to work on their speech and they want to have more fluency. And there's some people who may want some less tension in their speech. So we recognize that there are people who stutter who may want to make some changes into their speech, but we're not closed to the idea that stuttering is just about how you talk, and it's about difference, and it's about diversity of speech. So I think that's what you're going off of. So that sort of is, in terms of stuttering, that's sort of the model of the framework that we are moving towards. So I think the bigger discussion is just embracing the fact that people are different, embracing the fact that difference is the normal.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's to clarify, it was kind of hard to form that in a question, but I guess that was maybe a comment and maybe just wanting you to explain that viewpoint for folks, that I think that it's a really helpful viewpoint for our whole field to adopt in many ways, and I think relates to an overall broader discussion of inclusion. So thanks.
And I think, now I'm not an expert in this, but I think autism is sort of moving towards that. Actually, a lot of the neurodiversity discussions come out of autism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this idea that you have to change behaviors, you have to you have to make them have eye contact. And sometimes, and I know there's some research to show that sometimes people are better when they don't make eye contact. So again, I'm not an expert in autism, but a lot of the neurodiversity research comes out of autism. So what's the best way to address people not doing the work? I don't know. I think we can all contribute in different ways. A contribution might be a needs survey. A contribution might be joining a constituency group. A contribution might be working to make your class a safer space. I mean, I think people can contribute in a variety of ways. But the best way to address people not doing the work, I'm not sure that I have the answer. But I do know that moving forward is the best way. And I think Oprah, yes, I'm going to bring it. I cannot have a talk without bringing Oprah into the conversation. She always says that when you're running a race, the energy it takes to just turn around to see what the other person is doing takes away from you moving forward. So I think the key is just to continue to move forward in your efforts to make change. And hopefully everyone else will come along.
Derek, I'll just add to that. I think a way to help too is to share your own ideas and what you've done and when they've been successful and when they've not been successful, so that it's not that like you're calling someone out because you feel like they haven't done enough or they haven't done it in the right ways. So it's more like, I don't know, indirect modeling.
Oh, yes.
What could be done and trying to facilitate, right? As Dr. Whitfield just showed, I think we can often go back to what we know in our field that works for helping people, and using that or examining that and questioning that, and bring it over to this issue.
Thank you. And I'm getting a lot of messages here that you probably can't see, but just these messages I'm getting shows me that this is something that is that people want to work on, that people want to address. So is there a way for me to get a copy of the chat? If I'm the host, I get a copy of it. I would love to have a copy of these messages, at least private ones.
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe so. And I can send you any that were public, but I think you're a co-host, so you should have those too. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's some of these messages that I really want to address. Maybe I can email some of you privately just to keep the dialogue going, because some of these are really important. And some of these I don't really have all the answers to now, but there's some certainly are things that I could think over more deeply. Other thoughts or observations?
Hey, Derek, if it's okay, I can address Brianna's question, the first part of it. And if you want to follow up, she asked about, she noticed in the BGSU clinic, it seems that most, if not all, the clients are white. They're not all white. As the audiologist, I know what my client load is. Yes, it's predominantly white, absolutely. In the speech clinic, maybe Donna can weigh in more on what the breakup is, but we're in Wood County. In Wood County, I looked real quick, so I wasn't off. It's about 93% white. And we are, we serve the entire public community, not just the university community. I think the university community is more diverse than what the county is itself. So that explains partly, most of why most of our clientele is white, because that's what the county that we're in is made up of. That being said, is there an issue with our disadvantaged populations around the country not having access, not being willing or not knowing how maybe to access those services? And I don't feel like I'm the authority to speak on that in any way, shape, or form, but how do we make those services accessible? So I don't know if any of you have better thoughts on that and like to weigh in.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear from other clinicians, but I know just from my work in stuttering, I can say that many times people don't even think that it's an issue that needs to be addressed. So I know, like, a lot of the adults who I talked to when I interviewed them about the stories, they said when I was growing up, no one even talked about it or thought that it was even a problem. That was even the case for my own growing up. So I think sometimes it could just be people, I think just seeking services out in general just might be a concern or might be an issue. I mean, people who come to the clinic probably because they've thought about it and they're actively are seeking out services for their clients. But sometimes it could be that families just don't even know what their resources are or what resources are available, or even if it's even an issue that needs to be addressed. That could be one reason too.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, Derek, as well, that healthcare disparity is such a huge issue all over the United States, all over the world. And certainly Littlewood County isn't any exception to that. So, part of what we have to do is be better at getting the word out, letting people know that we're here and what we can do. So that becomes an issue for not just us, but for everybody with healthcare disparity, I think.
Mm-hmm. There was a question here: what are the main reasons individuals do not accept diversity and inclusion, and is it a specific educational approach that can ameliorate this? I think sometimes people think that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's to the disadvantage maybe of people who are white, possibly. But I think it's just this idea that diversity and inclusion is really everybody. Everybody benefits from diversity and inclusion. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, yes, we may be focusing on specific populations to address those needs, but that improves the space for everyone. So that, I think, is possibly a reason why people don't. I mean, maybe there's misunderstandings about diversity and inclusion and what they mean and who it benefits. Could possibly be a reason. Is there a specific educational approach that can ameliorate this? I think it's just showing how everybody benefits from it. I mean, as a profession in general, we all benefit from diversity and inclusion because we're able to better serve our students and better serve our clients. You know, I don't, so there's a question, how do we reach a place in a predominantly white space where students from underrepresented backgrounds don't feel they have to assimilate, but are comfortable to express themselves in a language that they feel is to them? You know, I think, you know, the more we normalize difference, maybe the more that will help. But I don't know if I have an exact answer there. I think we have a lot of work to do. You know, certainly we talk a lot about dialect and difference and how dialects are not disorders, but you know, there's still a large prevailing attitude in general about how people talk and how people behave. So I think that may be like a larger question, like that maybe have to, if that's addressed on a larger level. I think stereotypes about people's differences in general still exists. So maybe when we confront the bigger stereotypes, then that may help in these smaller spaces, possibly. I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, now, I mean, and I'm doing some research on the experiences of people who stutter, who are also in the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm just going to go from that standpoint that some of my participants said that, you know, there was a time where being gay was so stigmatized that you did whatever you could to try and not show people that you were gay. But now, you know, because of the visibility, you know, and you see gay characters on TV and in movies, and it's just becoming accepted that, you know, people now feel comfortable, even if it's an environment where everyone is not gay, people feel more comfortable saying I have a partner, or if I'm a man, I have a husband, or they feel more comfortable using different pronouns. But that's because in the larger sphere, we're seeing more acceptance. So then people don't feel like they have to hide as much in the smaller spaces. So I think the same can be said maybe for other types of identities where people feel they have to assimilate now. I think by addressing the larger stereotypes on a larger scale, that may help on the smaller scale. Yeah, and again, I just really appreciate your openness and your vulnerability. I really want to, I'm just going to go back and read through all of these comments in the chat, both the public and the private comments. And I really want to just take these comments and read them and think about them and address them either with you personally or maybe like in a follow-up presentation. But all of these comments I really value. And some of them I can address as easily because I don't think I know, but I certainly do want to think about them more deeply. Thank you. Appreciate that.